Hi, and welcome to our next grammar lesson. Today we'll be focusing on the proper use of quotation marks. Let's start with the basic usage and functions of the quotation mark. Now, before we dive into this lesson, it's important to address a big issue, that of consistency. In your experience as writers and indeed readers, you may have come across both double quote marks and single quote marks, the latter also known as inverted commas. Which style you choose to use doesn't matter a whole lot. What is important is that you keep consistency throughout your writing. Another important feature to be aware of are the subtle differences between British and American English. In British English, the generally accepted rule is that the punctuation marks go outside of the quote, unless it's part of the quote itself. Where in American English, it's common practice to include the punctuation marks within the quote, even if it's a partial sentence. So, let's move on to some examples. The Prime Minister described opposition to his government's plans as misguided. When we place a word within quotation marks like this, we are showing that the Prime Minister actually used the word misguided. Using direct quotes like these in sentences can really add an extra dimension to your work, that little bit of extra flavour. However, as we have talked about before, use these sparingly. Using them too much lessens their impact significantly. As it's important to use these quotation marks sparingly, it's worth thinking about when exactly to use them. If the word or phrase that has been used is a common one, or a word that you would use normally, it might not be worth pointing it out. Save your quotes for a particularly interesting turn of phrase. Here the sentence has the same amount of impact. A great example of this is this sentence. The Prime Minister described opposition to his government's plans as absurdly contradictory. Absurdly contradictory is a very unusual phrase, and placing this in quotation marks really has an impact, making it stand out even more. We can almost hear the Prime Minister's emotion and opinion in the quote. So again, don't unnecessarily embellish every phrase. Save it for ones that will really stand out and add value and impact to your writing. Another important thing to know about quotations, especially when directly citing someone, is that it's important to attribute the quote to its speaker as quickly as possible. Look at this example. It's taken a long time, but we finally got there. I know this may sound like a cliche, but the best is yet to come. The turnout of this election was amazing, the Prime Minister said. The attribution comes at the end of three longer sentences here. Doing this leaves the reader in suspense for far too long, wondering who is being quoted. The alternative and more effective way of crediting a quote to someone is to do it near the beginning of the quote, placing the attribution in the middle. It's taken a long time, but we finally got there, the Prime Minister said. I know this may sound like a cliche, but the best is yet to come. The turnout of this election was amazing. Here, the reader experiences a small, intriguing amount of suspense, then the realization of who said the quote, which will help in their understanding, followed by the rest of the quote. You can also tell the reader who was talking right at the beginning of the quote. The Prime Minister said, but this does do away with the suspense entirely.